Republican nominee, I can guarantee you, like Young Kim, who was the lady who beat Gil Cisneros, ran as a moderate Republican, which you like never see nowadays. She was like, I want to work across the aisle with everyone. I will like
Hmm.
she didn't support Trump. She kind of ran on that message, which definitely probably helped her out in that campaign. But she definitely did attack Gil on his support for defund the police, which in that area definitely did hurt because they have a very, very bad problem, and especially in the LA County area of his congressional district. They have a very high crime rate because Compton and many of these high crime cities like Inglewood are in his congressional district, which is CA 39. So,
Yeah, I mean, I think like that, and really, I think the whole point of the article that
and
she's,
also defund the police also really isn't that popular of a policy though, Spencer. You realize like only like 30-something% of Americans support it. Like that's one of the only progressive policies that isn't really a
yeah, I
popular
think that's
policy.
fair. I think that's fair, but like,
But like the
yeah,
idea, like
and I
oh,
also
Medicare
think
for all
that's like,
destroyed,
if
like
you look
that
at
being Garcelle
if you look at like what people would
is
actually like,
electric.
if you sat most Democrats down and you asked them like, what reforms would you want to do to police, like name them, like that is
Whatever
you
their
would
interest
get
group tells them.
you would get reforms that are very popular,
Yeah, no, I
uh,
agree. Yeah,
like people do acknowledge that there's a problem with the police in this country. They don't want to fund them, but they do want some pretty major reforms in the way police are going. I think that is kind of a failure of messaging and kind of marketing in that. And I mean, defunding and restructuring would also, I think, be incredibly popular.
restructuring would have been a much better word, but I still think that would have been a little bit risky. I think the idea of police reform is a much better word, to be honest.
Yeah, and I think it's definitely a safer word, but I think the principle of like restructuring, though, I think it's something that sounds a lot more reasonable. And if you went like defunding the police and restructuring are, I think, two biggest, and that's definitely it's a failure of messaging, but it's not just a failure of messaging on like the Bernie Sanders wing of the Democratic Party. Like that's a failure of
No,
it's a failure of a lot of different people. So left-wing populists often believes there is a silent majority who agree with them if only they can be organized to go to the polls. If that were true, though, and of course, I wouldn't necessarily say that, but I think it's kind of a case by case, election by election basis. For example, if you look at the Bernie Sanders presidency, like that was a very presidential run. That was a very, very complex race with a lot of different like constituencies within the Democratic Party that Bernie Sanders was kind of like slowly turning over and building kind of a 30% strategy until the race changed. He failed to adapt, and I also think for like a large number of other factors, he was kind of pushed out. But we did see pre the moderate consolidation and Super Tuesday that silent majority beginning to form. If that were true, though, an election with record turnout should have done much better for the progressives. And it's really kind of incredible that, here's the thing, progressives were, in large part, not on major ballot races. Joe Biden's not a progressive. None of the Senate candidates running were really progressive. And we already went over how
besides Cal Cunningham, I would say he's probably the only.
I'd say relatively.
I know,
But
I know, yeah, like he supported Bernie, but he wasn't like a labeled progressive because he wasn't really running on progressive policies.
yeah,
But
I'd
he
say
did
like
support Bernie
yeah. I mean,
in
I
the
think
presidential.
I'm talking more about like labeled progressive, but um,
Yeah,
like
I
I
agree.
think that those are things that they're not referendums on the left wing. They're not referendums on how popular these kind of like left wing ideas are. Like they're references on the moderates. They're references on the dynamics of the time, which is kind of a like very dishonest way of putting it. The voters who live in places that determine political control in this country tend to be more conservative than we are. I mean, that is also an incredibly dishonest reading of, I think, inaccurate reading. I mean, you can quibble with the two words there, but I think it's just doesn't fully like represent the difference between the politics of Medicare for all, Green New Deal, $15 minimum wage, as opposed to kind of woke culture, like feminism, and the kind of base social politics that are a lot more kind of popular with the big city liberals, that of which Michelle Goldberg is, and the policies that she champions and supports. So yet that doesn't mean that the Democratic Party doesn't need the left. Leaders like Bernie Sanders and Ocasio-Cortez were loyal soldiers in this election. And I think they need to really start thinking about what happens if they withdraw some of their power. After the primaries, and again, I really just love the condescending tone emanating from this here. After the primaries, they put aside their disappointment of rally voters whom Joe Biden might not have reached. One analysis showed that, and again, I think if things had continued in the way that they were pre-coronavirus pandemic and especially pre-Black Lives Matter over the summer, Biden would have, I think, really had much more trouble than he did with the left-wing vote. One analysis showed that voting by young people was up by 8% in 2020. I don't think that's because people were that excited about Joe Biden. And after the coronavirus, the issues young Biden voters cared about were racism and climate change. The Democratic Party can't afford to alienate people inspired by Sanders and the Squad. Let's see how we go with that on Biden. I'd like to see him actually do that, but I'm afraid that's not the area we're going. Finally here, the Democrats' loss in 2004 was devastating, but recovering from it didn't mean moving right. I mean, technically it did, because in 2006, Rahm Emanuel ran the midterm elections, which went great. Literally, he bailed out of races that the Democrat ended up winning because they were too progressive, and he just threw them to the wind. The Ohio Ballot Initiative was one of the several that banned them, along with same-sex marriage. Like these civil unions, they were banned on the Ohio Ballot Initiative. Agitation for marriage equality turned support for such unions into a moderate liberal position, and then the centrist position, and then the law of delay. I mean, that's how activism works, and I think the Democratic Party is the question. Like, that's the variable there. Will they be an obstacle, or will they be a party of the activist? Will they be a party of change? Will they be a party of principle? And I think we all know kind of where they stand about that. We are going way, way long here, so we're going to send you off and on your way. Hope you enjoyed today's show. It's been Newsflash.